Whether in fantasy or real life, someone has looked at a gun and asked, how can I get this to shoot faster? And their answer was, add more barrels, like the Ratling gun in Warhammer Fantasy, where magic is real and war crimes aren't. Or the M134 minigun, a weapon so awesome, you don't need magic. We're going to look into the lore of the Ratling gun, how it's used by the Skaven, and the flaws that come with it, while looking into the history of rotary barrel weapons that led to the M134 and how the platform was originally made to save lives. You heard that right. The Ratling gun wasn't exactly invented from scratch, nor are they exactly old. Created around 2400 IC, which puts them at about 100 years or so before the end times becomes a problem. Pretty much what happened is the Skaven saw repeater handguns and said, that's cool, but we can do better. Step 1, replace lead with warpstone. Step 2, add a warp steam battery. What you get is a weapon that requires 2 to operate. One Skaven is holding and cranking the battery, which causes the barrel to both turn and fire the weapon. The other Skaven is holding the actual weapon and has the simple job of aiming while taking all the credit. And after testing on many Skaven slaves and probably a litany of other creatures, Clan Scryer would unveil the weapon to the detriment of the world and have been trying to fulfill orders from other clans ever since. For good reason. They have a high rate of fire from 216 rounds per minute with the weapon team, 300 with the Ratling Warp Blaster, an upscaled vehicle-mounted Ratling gun, and 720 with the experimental single-operator Ratling gun used in Vermintide 2. While they have a high rate of fire, their velocity is low as the bullets have a tendency to stick out of their targets, giving them the nickname Teeth Breakers. Even if the bullets don't penetrate that deep into a target, it's enough where in conjunction with the volume of fire, still makes them lethal. And if someone is only wounded, they now have warpstone in them, which is practically a death sentence in and of itself, as I imagine getting hit with physical chaos would be worse than being pumped with uranium. Finally, they're easy to use. One guy cranks, the other aims. The downsides are sizable to us, but negligible to Skaven. Really, it's just one downside. They aren't 100% reliable. By that, I mean they can jam a lot or just straight blow up. Now in lore, the latter seems to happen more often when they release the gimbal limiter. That's really what it's called, which increases its rate of fire. The best example I can give is like messing with the timing on a machine gun, where in doing so, you cause the gun to fire sooner than it was meant to mechanically, which means it's technically shooting faster, but that also means there's a higher chance the explosion that comes with firing a gun isn't happening in the chamber, but in your hands. The Ratling gun is the embodiment of Skaven culture. It's a powerful weapon that can dominate on the battlefield, but due to its unpredictable nature, can cause just as much chaos to the Skaven. Sure, it can mow down a row of orcs, but the operator could lose control and spray a burst into a line of his fellow Skaven, which he'll assure you was an accident and in no means a way to settle an old score. This is textbook high risk, high reward that Skaven love because they're always looking for the easiest way to the top, even if it means using a weapon as dangerous to its users as their enemies. To talk about the minigun, we should first go back to the start of rotary barrel weapons. That dates back to the days of the American Civil War, where Dr. Richard Gatling would realize more Union soldiers were dying due to disease than injuries, and decide the best course would make a weapon that could put out so much firepower that large armies wouldn't be necessary. Thus, he invented the Gatling gun, a hand-cranked crew-served rotary barrel weapon capable of firing 200 rounds a minute, which could match the firepower of 50 men with muskets. While it didn't see that much action in the Civil War, it would see action throughout the world, including Africa and Japan. And in 1893, Gatling would have the genius idea to strap an electric motor to see just how fast it could fire. The firearm equivalent of kids souping up their shitty 97 Honda Civics. Turns out, the gun could shoot continuously at 600 rounds per minute, fire in bursts of 1,500 rounds per minute, which is what the MG42 could do, and had a theoretical RPM of 3,000. The Gatling gun would then be obsolete prior to World War I, being replaced with lighter, easier to use machine guns like the Maxim. It wouldn't be until the late 1940s that rotary firearms would come back, with the US Air Force requesting a new cannon for its fighters. General Electric, yes, the company that makes household appliances, would start working on Project Vulcan. which, after many iterations, would be completed in the 50s. The result being an upsized Gatling gun using an electric motor firing 20mm rounds and would be standard for fighters. Infantry wouldn't see use of rotary weapons until Vietnam, when it was determined the M60s door gunners used weren't sufficient, as they were having to fire so many rounds to cover the helicopter and troops that the barrels would overheat or the firearm would jam. General Electric again would step up to the plate. They would downsize the Vulcan to fire a 7.62 by 51mm with a variable rate of fire that could top out at 6,000 rounds per minute and would see use around a 3,000 to 4,000 rounds per minute range. The firearm accomplishes this by loading and ejecting multiple cartridges at the same time, proving Gatling's theory he made 60 years ago. The minigun would then be mounted on vehicles used by all the branches of the US military. But can a person carry it? The answer is yes, but it's highly impractical. The rate of fire and the caliber of the round makes it impossible to control, and you couldn't carry enough ammo to make it worthwhile. Even at 3,000 rounds per minute, you would burn through 1,000 rounds in 20 seconds. That's 56 pounds of ammo, not including the links or canisters carrying the ammo, or the 41-pound firearm. The only reason we see it used in Predator and Terminator 2 with any proficiency is because the firearm was shooting blanks, and the RPM was reduced to 1,200 rounds per minute, which is also why you're able to see the barrel turn and not be a stationary blur. There is the XM214 microgun, which is the M134 scaled down to 5.56, where they did make a setup for an individual to operate it, and the rig, weapon, and 1,000 rounds of ammo all came out to 85 pounds. It was easier to operate, but none of the branches saw enough interest to mass produce it. That said, it does mean that it's reasonable that this unit of a clan rat jacked up on warp snuff could carry and operate this version of a Ratling gun in Vermintide, which reinforces why we saw and loved the minigun in the movies. It may be impractical, but man, is it an awesome mean of sowing destruction against any poor son of a bitch that gets in your way. And as long as it has a place as defensive armament for military vehicles, the minigun and Vulcan will continue to be a mainstay in the armed forces throughout the world. For comparisons, there's a fair number of similarities. Both have crew-served, vehicle, and individual carry versions. Fire rates are similar when talking strictly about the Gatling gun, but that's fair. I don't want to imagine the number of D6 shots 6,000 RPM gets you. Hell, even in Total War, Warhammer, the Ratling guns shoot out of the barrel in the 4 o'clock position, which is where the OG Gatling would fire. Their limited mobility makes them a defensive armament, though being shot at with this would certainly feel like an offensive weapon. The main differences are the ammo, reliability, and mechanism of fire. Ratling guns use steam, and the minigun uses electricity. Overall, it's a simple concept that Games Workshop have managed to translate well enough into fantasy with a little use of steampunk and magic. In conclusion, both the Ratling gun and the minigun are the height of rapid-fire weapons in their respective worlds. The Ratling gun, with its magical enhancements and unpredictable nature, embodies the Skaven, and how reckless they're willing to be in the pursuit of power, while the M134 minigun, with roots as old as the Civil War, grew to be the modern marvel that showcases the United States' drive to innovate and dominate the realm of warfare. Both weapons, despite their differences, serve as a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of their creators, whether they be ratmen or engineers. Thank you all for watching. I've been looking for a chance to talk about fantasy, and this was my first pick because it's iconic and just a fun concept that was well worth diving into. Like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you next time out in the warp.